The alarms screamed through the ship like wounded animals. Red lights flashed in every corridor. Captain Park stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn, his hands steady on the railing as the colony ship shook violently. "Navigation failure," shouted Lieutenant Commander from her station. "We dropped out of hyperspace too early, way too early." Looked at the main screen. The stars were wrong. These were not the stars they were supposed to see. 8,000 sleeping colonists trusted him to bring them to their new home. Now they were lost in space that no human had ever seen before. "Where are we?" he asked. His voice was calm. It was always calm. Checked her instruments 3 times before answering. Her face went pale. "Sir, we're in Dominion space." The bridge went silent. Everyone knew about the Dominion. Every species in the galaxy knew about the Dominion. They were the nightmare that ruled 12 star systems. They conquered not through battle but through fear. They broke the minds of their enemies before firing a single weapon. No species had ever resisted them. No species had ever tried. Doctor, the ship's psychologist, stepped closer to the captain. She had studied the Dominion for years. She knew what was coming. "They'll find us soon," she said quietly. "Their sensors cover every corner of their space." "How long?" asked. "Hours, maybe less." Nodded slowly. He looked around at his crew. He saw fear in their eyes. He understood. But fear was just another problem to solve. "Wake the senior staff," he ordered, "and start checking the engines. We need to know if we can run." But running was not going to be an option. Within 3 hours they appeared. Dominion warships emerged from the darkness like monsters rising from deep water. There were 20 of them. Each one was 5 times bigger than the Eternal Dawn. Their hulls were black and covered with strange symbols that seemed to move and twist. Just looking at them made people feel sick. Then the broadcasts began. Every screen on the Eternal Dawn turned on by itself. The images that appeared were horrible. Cities burning. Aliens screaming as Dominion soldiers marched through their streets. Bodies piled like garbage. Children crying for parents who would never come. A voice spoke in perfect human language. It was deep and cold and seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You have entered the sacred space of the Dominion. You will submit. You will kneel. You will serve. Resistance brings only pain. Resistance brings only death. Look upon our glory and know your place." The images kept coming. Species after species, world after world, all falling before the Dominion's terror. Some of the crew members started crying. Others looked away from the screens. A young officer vomited in the corner. But Captain just watched. His face showed nothing. Doctor stood beside him. "This is their method," she explained. "They call it the Dread Protocol. They flood your senses with horror until your will breaks. Most species surrender within hours. Some go mad. Very few last more than a day." Turned to look at her. "Has any species ever fought back?" "According to our records, no, never." Smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. "Then they've never met humans." He pressed the ship-wide communication button. His voice reached every corner of the Eternal Dawn, from the bridge to the deepest cargo hold, where the colonists still slept in their pods. "This is your captain speaking. As you can see, we have some visitors. They're trying to scare us. They're showing us pictures of death and destruction. They think this will make us give up." He paused. On the screens, the horror show continued. Dominion soldiers executing prisoners, planets being burned. The voice kept promising eternal suffering. "I want everyone to remember something," continued. 300 years ago, our ancestors survived the Great Collapse. They watched half of Earth die and they rebuilt anyway. 200 years ago, the plague wars killed 2 billion people. We survived. We always survive. These aliens think they invented fear. They don't know what fear is. We lived with fear since we were living in caves and running from tigers. He looked at. She was no longer pale. She was angry. That was better. "So here's what we're going to do," said. "We're going to ignore their little movie. We're going to fix our engines, and we're going to figure out how to get home. Anyone who needs mental support, doctor's office is open. Anyone who wants to pray, the chapel is available. Anyone who wants to fight, start checking the weapons. Questions? There were no questions. Hours passed. The Dominion broadcasts continued without stopping. They showed new horrors every few minutes. They played sounds designed to cause panic. They sent smells through the ventilation system that made people remember their worst memories. But something strange happened. The humans adapted. At first they were scared. That was natural, but then the fear started to change. Some people started making jokes about the broadcasts. "This one's not as scary as that movie I saw last year," someone said. A child drew a picture of a Dominion soldier with a funny hat. Someone started a betting pool on what horrible image would come next. Doctor watched all of this with growing amazement. She had studied fear her whole career. She had never seen anything like this. The humans weren't ignoring the fear. They were processing it. They were turning it into something they could handle. On the Dominion flagship, High Sovereign watched his monitors with growing confusion. For 10,000 years, the Dread Protocol had worked perfectly. Every species broke, every single one. But these humans, their stress levels had spiked at first, as expected. Then they started going down. Some of them were actually laughing. "Impossible," hissed. His advisors said nothing. They had never seen this either. Opened a direct channel to the human ship. His terrible face filled the Eternal Dawn's main screen. His eyes were like black holes. His voice shook the walls. "You will surrender now. You will kneel before the Dominion, or you will suffer beyond your darkest imagination." Captain looked up at the screen. He straightened his uniform. He smiled that small, calm smile. "We've seen worse," he said. "You'll have to do better." And he cut the communication. In 10,000 years of conquest, no one had ever hung up on a High Sovereign, stared at the blank screen. For the first time in his very long life, he felt something unfamiliar. He felt uncertain. 3 days had passed since the Eternal Dawn entered Dominion space. 3 days of constant psychological attack. 3 days of horrors broadcast on every screen, and the humans were still not broken. Chief Engineer crawled out from under a broken engine component, his face covered in grease. Behind him, the broadcast showed a Dominion torture chamber. He didn't even look at it anymore. "Engines at 60%, he reported to Captain through the communicator. "Give me 2 more days and I might get us to 70. "Will 70 be enough to outrun them?" Laughed. It was a tired laugh, but real. "Not a chance, but it'll be enough to make them work for it." On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander coordinated the ship's defensive systems. They had weapons, but nothing that could seriously hurt a Dominion warship. Still, she prepared everything they had. If they were going to die, they would die fighting. "Sergeant Moon," she called. "Status report." Sergeant First Class Moon walked onto the bridge. She was in her 50s, with gray in her hair and scars on her hands. She had fought in Earth's last great war, when nations still fought each other instead of working together. Those days seemed like ancient history now. "Security teams are ready," reported. "Every corridor has a defensive position. If they try to board us, they'll bleed for every meter." Nodded. "Good, because I think they're about to try something new." She was right. High Sovereign had realized that the standard Dread protocol wasn't working, so he escalated. The lights on the Eternal Dawn flickered. Then the air itself seemed to change. Strange sounds came from everywhere and nowhere. Low rumbles that made bones shake. High screams that felt like needles in the brain. Shadows moved in the corners that shouldn't have been there. Was using the deep fear. It was an ancient technology that reached directly into the mind. It found your worst memories and brought them to life. It made you see things that weren't there. It drove most species to suicide within hours. Throughout the ship, people started seeing things. A young ensign saw her dead mother standing in the hallway. A cargo worker saw the accident that killed his brother, playing over and over again. An elderly colonist saw the faces of everyone she had ever lost. But something unexpected happened. The humans didn't run from these visions. They confronted them. The young ensign reached out to touch her mother's ghost. "I miss you," she whispered, "but you're not real and I have work to do." The vision faded. The cargo worker watched his brother's accident one more time. Then he closed his eyes and said, "I forgive myself." The images stopped. The elderly colonist looked at all the faces of her lost loved ones. She smiled at them. "I carry you with me every day," she said. "You don't scare me, you give me strength." Doctor walked through the ship, helping those who struggled. But she found that most people didn't need much help. Humans, she realized, had a unique relationship with their inner demons. They didn't ignore them or run from them. They had learned over thousands of years to make peace with them. On the Dominion flagship, watched his monitors with growing rage. The human stress indicators had spiked briefly during the deep fear attack. Then they dropped again. Some humans were actually reporting feeling better than before. "This is impossible," he growled. "No species has ever resisted the deep fear." His advisor, a thin creature named, studied the data carefully. "High Sovereign, perhaps we should try direct action. Perhaps we should simply attack them." His eyes narrowed. Direct action. Violence without psychological preparation. It was barbaric, it was primitive, it was necessary. "Send a boarding party," ordered. "Capture some of them. We will break them personally." The Dominion shuttle attached to the Eternal Dawn like a parasite. 12 Dominion soldiers entered the human ship. They were tall and terrible, with armor that seemed to absorb light. They expected to find cowering prey. Sergeant was waiting for them. "Welcome aboard," she said. Then she opened fire. The battle was short but intense. The Dominion soldiers were shocked. They were trained to terrify, not to fight. They expected their victims to freeze with fear. Instead, these humans moved like water. They used cover. They communicated with hand signals. They supported each other. They showed no fear at all. 3 Dominion soldiers died in the first minute. The others tried to retreat. His team cut them off. In 5 minutes it was over. 9 dead, 3 captured. Looked at the captured soldiers. They trembled as humans tied their hands. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I thought you were supposed to be scary." The prisoners were taken to doctor for questioning. One of them, younger than the others, eventually agreed to talk. "We don't understand," the prisoner said. Its voice was shaking. "Your species should be broken by now. The Dread Protocol has never failed. The Deep Fear has never failed. What are you?" Doctor sat across from the alien. She spoke gently, like a teacher explaining something to a student. "Let me tell you about humans," she said. "We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every day. Ice ages froze us. Plagues infected us. Predators hunted us. And we did terrible things to each other. We know fear. We know horror. We know suffering. But we also learned something important." She leaned closer. "We learned that fear is not the end. It is the beginning. When we are afraid, we don't give up. We get angry. We get creative. We find ways to survive. You've spent 10,000 years teaching the galaxy to fear you, but you never learned to fear anything yourselves. You don't know how to handle it when the fear doesn't work." The prisoner was silent for a long moment. Then it asked, "What happens now?" "Now," Doctor said, "your commander has to make a choice. He can keep trying to scare us, or he can try to actually fight us. But I should warn you about something." "What?" "We're much better at fighting than we are at being scared." On the Dominion flagship, received news of the failed boarding action. He couldn't believe it. 12 of his soldiers, defeated by soft creatures who had never known war. He pulled up the battle recordings and watched them again and again. The way the humans moved, the way they protected each other, the way they showed absolutely no hesitation. This was wrong. This was all wrong. For 10,000 years the Dominion had won without really fighting. Their reputation was their weapon, their terror was their strength, but these humans, they weren't impressed by reputation, and terror seemed to make them more determined, not less. Looked at his fleet of 20 warships. Then he looked at the small, damaged colony ship that refused to break. "Prepare for actual combat," he ordered. His voice was heavy. "We will destroy them with weapons since we cannot destroy them with fear." But as he gave the order, felt something cold in his chest. His soldiers hadn't really fought in centuries. They had forgotten how. And these humans, these strange creatures who laughed at nightmares, they had never forgotten. On the 5th day, Ambassador Shin woke from sleep. She was 73 years old, with white hair and sharp eyes that had seen too much. She had been a diplomat for 5 decades. She had negotiated peace treaties between nations that hated each other. She had talked warlords out of genocide. She had faced the worst of humanity and found ways to make them better. Captain met her in the medical bay as she recovered from the long sleep. He explained everything. The navigation failure, the Dominion fleet, the failed terror tactics, the coming battle. Listened without interrupting. When he finished, she simply nodded. "I want to talk to them," she said. "Ambassador, they've been trying to break us for 5 days. I don't think they want to talk." "Everyone wants to talk," said. "They just don't know it yet. Set up the communication. Let me do what I do." An hour later, Ambassador Shin's face appeared on every Dominion ship's screen. High Sovereign was surprised, but curious enough to listen. Perhaps this old human would finally beg for mercy. He was wrong. "My name is Shin," she began. "I am a diplomat. I have spent my life studying conflict and peace. I am not here to surrender. I am here to explain." "Explain," his voice boomed. "Explain your impending doom." "No, explain why you cannot frighten us. I think you deserve to understand before this goes any further." On the Dominion flagship, Scholar watched with interest. He was different from other Dominion officials. He studied cultures and histories. He wanted to know why things happened, not just make them happen, and these humans fascinated him. "High Sovereign," said carefully, "perhaps we should listen. Knowledge is power." Hesitated, then nodded. "Speak, human. Amuse us with your explanations." Smiled. It was the smile of a grandmother who was about to teach an important lesson. "Let me tell you about our history," she said. "About 500 years ago, humans discovered a terrible weapon. We called it the atomic bomb. It could destroy entire cities in a single flash. And we used it. We used it on ourselves. We killed hundreds of thousands of our own kind in seconds." The Dominion officers shifted uncomfortably. This was not what they expected. "We didn't stop there," continued. "We built more bombs, bigger bombs. We built enough bombs to destroy our entire planet many times over, and we pointed them at each other. For decades, we lived knowing that any moment our leaders might choose to end everything. Every human alive knew they could die in nuclear fire at any time." She paused to let that sink in. "We also had wars, many wars. In one war, 60 million people died. 60 million. We built camps where we murdered people just because of their religion or their race. We invented new and terrible ways to kill each other. Poison gas, disease weapons, machines that could hunt people down and destroy them." Was taking notes frantically. This species had done all of this to themselves. "We also destroyed our own planet," said. "We made the air dirty. We poisoned the water. We killed so many animals that they disappeared forever. We cut down forests that took millions of years to grow. We changed the climate itself and watched our cities flood and our crops die. And you know what we did then?" "What?" asked. He didn't even realize he had spoken. "We fixed it. We survived. We learned. We came together as one species and we healed our world, not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Because that's what humans do. We fall down, we suffer, we make terrible mistakes, and then we get up and keep going." High Sovereign stared at the screen. He had conquered 12 star systems. He had broken 100 species. but he had never heard anything like this. "You show us images of death and destruction," said. "You think this will break us, but we have seen worse. We have done worse to ourselves, and we survived it all. Your terrors are impressive, but they are not new to us. We have faced the abyss. We have faced it again and again, and we're still here." On the eternal dawn, young navigator Minu watched the ambassador's speech with tears in his eyes. He had been the most frightened crew member at first. The Dominion broadcasts had given him nightmares. But now he understood something important. His grandmother had survived the Seoul collapse when an earthquake and tsunami had destroyed half the city. She had pulled herself from the rubble, found other survivors, and helped rebuild. She had been 16 years old. His grandfather had fought in the last war between nations before humanity united. He had seen friends die. He had been captured and tortured. He escaped and then helped negotiate the peace treaty. Minu came from survivors. All humans did. Every single human alive was descended from people who had faced death and chosen to keep living. He walked to Captain and stood at attention. "Sir, I'd like to volunteer for any dangerous missions you might need." Looked at him. "You were shaking with fear 3 days ago." "Yes, sir, I was, but I remembered my grandmother. If she could survive what she survived, I can handle some ugly aliens with good special effects." Smiled. "Report to Sergeant Moon. She could use another fighter." On the Dominion flagship, had spent hours studying human records. He watched their horror movies and realized that humans scared themselves for entertainment. He read their war poetry and found beauty in descriptions of terrible violence. He studied their survival stories and saw a species that treated near-death experiences as opportunities for growth. "High Sovereign," said carefully, "I believe I understand now. We have been using fear incorrectly against these humans." "What do you mean?" "Other species try to avoid fear. They hide from it. They are overwhelmed by it. But humans, they process fear differently. They confront it. They study it. They even enjoy it in controlled situations. When we attack them with terror, we are not breaking them. We are exercising them, making them stronger." Absorbed this information. It didn't make him happy. "Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest we be careful, High Sovereign, very careful, because if our psychological weapons make them stronger, then we may face enemies more dangerous than we have ever faced before." As if to prove his point, alarms suddenly blared through the Dominion flagship. Human weapons had destroyed one of their smaller warships, then another, then a third. Had figured out the weak points in Dominion shields. Engineer had modified their weapons to exploit those weak points, and the colonists themselves were helping to load ammunition and repair damage. The Eternal Dawn was wounded and outnumbered, but it was fighting back. Felt something cold settle in his heart. He looked at his fleet, these massive warships that had terrified a galaxy, and he wondered for the first time if they were enough. He received a report from other sectors of Dominion space. More human ships had been detected, small exploration vessels, military scouts, trading ships. None of them were running. All of them were heading deeper into Dominion territory. Toward him, the human fleet arrived on the 7th day. 12 warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their weapons hot and their shields raised. At the front was the battleship Indomitable Spirit, and behind it, the flagship of Admiral. Was 52 years old, with short black hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had started her career as a simple pilot and worked her way up through every rank. She knew every ship in her fleet by name. She knew every captain personally, and she had traveled 3 weeks through hostile territory to reach the Eternal Dawn. "Captain Park," she broadcast, "this is Admiral. Sorry we're late. Traffic was terrible." On the Eternal Dawn's bridge, tired cheers erupted. Captain actually laughed, the first real laugh he'd had in a week. "Admiral, you have no idea how good it is to see you." "I can imagine. Status report." "Engines at 65%. hull integrity at 40%, but everyone is alive and no one has surrendered. Wouldn't expect anything less. Now, let's show these Dominion creatures why they should have let you pass. High Sovereign watched the human reinforcements arrive with growing concern. His 20 warships still outnumbered the humans, but not by much. And after 7 days of watching the eternal dawn refuse to break, he was no longer confident in easy victory. But he still had one advantage: the Annihilator. The Annihilator was the Dominion's ultimate weapon. It was a massive ship, larger than all others, with only one purpose: destroying planets. It had been used 3 times in Dominion history. Each time, an entire species had surrendered immediately afterward. The message was clear: submit, or your worlds will burn. Prepare the Annihilator, ordered. We will destroy one of their colony worlds. Then they will understand true fear. But not everyone in the Dominion agreed with this plan. Had served for 200 years. He had watched countless species break and kneel. He had never questioned the Dominion's methods, but something about the humans had changed him. He secretly contacted the Eternal Dawn. Ambassador Shin was surprised to receive his message, but she agreed to talk. "I want to understand," said, his voice low. "How do you keep fighting when victory seems impossible, when you are outnumbered with no hope of escape?" Shin considered the question carefully. "Hope is not the same as certainty," she finally said. "We don't fight because we know we'll win. We fight because surrender is not in our nature. Hope itself is our weapon." But that makes no logical sense. Fighting a losing battle wastes resources. It causes unnecessary suffering. Perhaps, but it also inspires others. When people see someone stand up against impossible odds, something changes inside them. They start to believe that they can stand up too. That is the power of resistance. It spreads. Was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "What would you do if you were me?" "I would ask myself, what kind of future do I want to live in? One built on fear and submission, or one where people are free to choose their own paths?" Meanwhile, Admiral was not waiting for the Dominion to make the next move. She had a different strategy in mind. "We're going to broadcast," she told her captains. "Not threats, not horror, something else entirely." Captain I.M. of the Indomitable Spirit looked confused. "What kind of broadcast, Admiral?" "Stories. We're going to tell stories about survival, about resistance, about hope, and we're going to send them to every planet in the Dominion." Had learned something important from Doctor's reports. The Dominion had conquered many species by breaking their will, but those species weren't gone. They were just suppressed, afraid. If someone showed them that resistance was possible. The broadcasts began. Human voices telling tales of uprising and freedom, history lessons about revolutions, songs about hope and struggle, art that celebrated those who stood against tyranny. On enslaved worlds across the Dominion, people watched these broadcasts with wide eyes. For the first time in generations, they saw aliens who were not afraid, who were fighting back, who were winning. Questions began to spread. If these humans can resist, why can't we? Captain I.M. led a strike force against a Dominion fear broadcasting station. These stations had been pumping terror into a nearby system for 300 years. The local species had forgotten what silence sounded like. I.M. ships destroyed the station in 11 minutes. The broadcast stopped. On the planet below, millions of creatures looked up at suddenly quiet skies. For the first time in 300 years, there were no screaming voices in their heads, no images of death, no promises of pain. There was only silence, and in that silence something began to grow. Hope. News of the attack spread through the Dominion like fire. Other enslaved species started asking questions, started pushing back in small ways. The empire that had ruled through fear was beginning to crack. Responded with rage. He ordered the Annihilator to move toward human space. He would make an example of them. He would destroy one of their colony worlds and remind the galaxy why the Dominion was feared. Admiral intercepted the Annihilator's trajectory within hours. Her intelligence team had sources everywhere. "It's heading for New Sol," Lieutenant Commander reported. New Sol was the closest human colony world. 12 million people lived there. 12 million lives that would end in fire if the Annihilator reached its target. Looked at her fleet, 12 ships against the most powerful weapon in the galaxy. It seemed impossible. But she remembered something her grandmother used to say. Impossible things happen every day. That's how history is made. "All ships," ordered, "set course to intercept. We reach the threshold system in 12 hours. That's where we make our stand." Captain Park, despite the damage to the Eternal Dawn, volunteered to join the fleet. "My ship might be wounded," he said, "but my people are not. We're coming with you." Ambassador Shin reached out to one more time. "The Annihilator is moving. Millions of innocent people will die. Is this the future you want?" Was silent for a long time. Then he said, "No, it is not." "Then help us stop it." "How? I am just one. I cannot stop the High Sovereign." "You can tell the truth. You can tell the other enslaved species what you have seen. You can show them that the fear was always a lie." Thought about his 200 years of service. He thought about all the species he had watched break and submit. He thought about the humans, who refused to break no matter what the Dominion did. And he made a choice. "I will help you," he said, "whatever it costs me." The human fleet raced toward the threshold system. Behind them, the Annihilator followed like death itself. And across the Dominion, whispers of rebellion spread like wildfire. 12 hours until the battle that would change everything. Admiral addressed all ships one final time. "They've spent 10,000 years teaching the galaxy to fear them. Tomorrow, we teach them what fear really means." Threshold system was a place of no importance. A dying star, some asteroids, and empty space. But on this day, it became the most important place in the galaxy. On this day, history changed. Admiral's fleet formed a defensive line across the system. 12 human warships faced the Dominion Armada. Behind the warships floated the wounded Eternal Dawn, still fighting despite everything. Across from them came the enemy. 18 Dominion warships led by the Annihilator itself, a ship so massive it seemed to swallow the stars behind it. High Sovereign stood on its bridge, confident in his coming victory. "They are outnumbered," said. "They are, and they still choose to fight. This species truly is insane." "Perhaps," Scholar replied quietly, "or perhaps they understand something we do not." Admiral opened a channel to all human ships. Her voice was calm and strong. Thousands of sailors and soldiers listened in silence. "I'm not going to lie to you," she said. "This will be hard. Many of us will not survive the next few hours, but I want you to remember why we're here. 12 million people on New Sol, families, children, farmers and teachers and artists and engineers. They're counting on us. They don't even know it, but they're counting on us. And we will not let them down." She paused, looking at her tactical display. The Annihilator was growing larger every second. "The Dominion has ruled through fear for 10,000 years. Today, fear dies. Today, we show the galaxy that terror can be beaten. Today, we fight not just for ourselves, but for every species that has ever been broken by these monsters. Fight well, fight hard. And if you have to die, die with a smile on your face, because dying free is better than living afraid." The battle began. The human ships moved like dancers, weaving between Dominion fire with impossible grace. Admiral had studied every battle recording she could find. The Dominion hadn't really fought in centuries. Their tactics were old and predictable, and their soldiers, so used to facing broken prey, were shocked when their enemies fought back with ferocity. Captain IM's indomitable spirit led the assault, diving straight at the largest Dominion warship. Its weapons blazed, targeting the spots where shields were weakest. 2 Dominion ships exploded in the first 10 minutes. But the humans took losses too. The cruiser Bright Morning was hit by concentrated fire and broke apart. The destroyer Eternal Hope rammed a Dominion ship to save a wounded ally, both vessels vanishing in a ball of fire. On the Eternal Dawn, Captain Park watched the battle with clenched fists. His ship was too damaged to fight directly, but he could still help. "All hands," he announced. "We're moving to shield position. Any wounded ships can shelter behind us." The colonists aboard, 8,000 people who had expected to sleep through their journey to a new home, volunteered to help. Doctors treated wounded sailors from other ships. Engineers helped repair damaged systems. Even children carried supplies to wherever they were needed. Young Navigator Minu manned a defense station, firing at enemy fighters that came too close. His hands were steady. His fear was gone. "Sergeant Moon," Lieutenant Commander called. "I need boarding teams ready. We're going to hit the Annihilator directly." Smiled, it was not a nice smile. "Already prepared, just give us a ride." Led a squadron of small ships in a desperate run toward the Annihilator. Dominion fire destroyed half of them, but the rest got through. They attached to the giant ship's hull and burned through. Inside the Annihilator, human soldiers fought Dominion guards in close combat. His team moved like shadows, using every trick and technique that humans had developed over thousands of years of fighting each other. The Dominion soldiers were bigger, stronger, better armored, but the humans were faster, smarter, and completely unafraid. In corridor after corridor, the invaders pushed deeper into the ship and reached the main reactor room. "Charges are set," reported. 5 minutes until the whole thing goes up. "Then we need to leave, now." They fought their way to a maintenance bay and found an escape pod. As they launched into space, looked back at the Annihilator. Deep inside it, explosions began to chain. And then across every Dominion channel, his voice rang out. "People of the Dominion, enslaved species across the 12 systems, listen to me. I have served the High Sovereign for 200 years. I have watched our empire conquer through fear. But today I tell you the truth. The fear was always a lie." His image appeared on screens across Dominion space. Behind him, the Annihilator was burning. "These humans," continued, "refused to break. We hit them with everything we had, our dread protocol, our deep fear, our overwhelming force, and they laughed at us. They fought back, and they are winning. If they can resist us, so can you. The Dominion is not invincible. We can be beaten. Rise up, be free. The time is now." The Annihilator exploded. The light was visible across the entire system, a new sun born from the death of the galaxy's most terrible weapon. Watch from his command ship, disbelief flooding his ancient mind. The Annihilator was gone. His fleet was crumbling. His own had betrayed him. And for the first time in 10,000 years, High Sovereign felt what his victims had always felt. True fear. The Dominion fleet began to break apart. Some ships surrendered. Others tried to flee. The iron discipline that had held them together vanished in moments. Captain Iam's voice came over the communication channel. "Admiral, we have the High Sovereign's ship surrounded. He's requesting to surrender." Smiled, "Tell him we accept, but he answers for his crimes, all of them." Across the Dominion's 12 systems, enslaved species heard his message and saw the Annihilator's destruction. On 1,000 worlds, people who had lived in terror for generations began to stand up. The rebellion that had been impossible was now inevitable. Ambassador Shin negotiated with what remained of the Dominion leadership. There would be war crimes trials. There would be reparations. There would be freedom for every enslaved species. It would take years, maybe decades, to fully untangle the empire of fear, but the work had begun. Captain Park finally set course for the original colony destination. The Eternal Dawn was battered but alive. 8,000 colonists would reach their new home, carrying with them the story of how they refused to be afraid. Doctor wrote her final report for Earth Command. She stared at the blank document for a long time before beginning. "The Dominion made a fundamental mistake," she wrote. "They assumed that all species process fear the same way. They believed that terror was a universal weapon that could break any will, but they had never met humans. They did not understand that we evolved on a world where death was constant, that we survived ice ages and plagues and predators, that we did terrible things to each other and found ways to live with the guilt, that we have stared into the abyss of our own extinction more times than we can count, and we always chose to keep living." She paused, remembering all the faces she had seen during the past weeks. The scared crew members who found their courage, the children who drew silly pictures of scary monsters, the soldiers who charged into impossible battles, the colonists who carried ammunition while the ship burned around them. "We do not run from fear," she continued. "We face it, we process it. We turn it into anger and determination and dark humor. We use it as fuel. That is not courage exactly. It is something deeper, something built into our very nature. We are the species that learned to survive by refusing to stop fighting, no matter how hopeless things seemed." She finished her report with one final thought. "When humanity crossed into Dominion space, the Dominion tried to frighten us. They tried every trick they had developed over 10,000 years of conquest, and they failed. They failed because fear is our oldest companion, and we have long since made our peace with it. They should have run. Instead, they learned what every predator eventually learns when it meets humans." She smiled as she typed the last words. "We are far more frightening than anything in the dark.